Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 110, Superman Red Sun. This is the last episode picked by our present level patron, Brian, and he's going out with quite a bang on this one. I love the story, and we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Just a friendly reminder that we are still accepting the voice recordings of your thoughts on Batman. Like I said, try to keep it around 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com so we can include that as part of our March month-long Batman celebration. Get those clips in now. So jumping right in, this is going to be a little different because we're not going to focus on just Superman, the character within the context of the Red Sun story. We're going to talk about several of the characters. And so there's not going to be a skit. This is just going to be more of a deep dive into some of the motivations and personas of these characters, these versions of these characters that we get in this very interesting story. So Superman Red Sun was written by Mark Millar with artwork by Dave Johnson, Andrew Robinson, Walden Wong, Killian Plunkett, and colors by Paul Mounts. And the first issue was released in 2003. This is a prestige format story told over 3 issues. And it's an Elseworlds tale that asks the simple question, what if Superman landed in the Soviet Union and not Smallville, Kansas? And so it takes both familiar DC characters and real world people and combines them into what I consider to be one of DC's best standalone stories. Certainly as far as Elseworlds go, I think this to me is probably the best Elseworlds story, just because it's so high concept and just the very idea of, it's a very basic question that apparently Mark Millar thought of when he was about 6 years old.
Hey, what I like about it the most, and we'll get into it obviously when we talk about each character, is that it's very clear, even if you had no idea exactly who everybody is, because some of the names are slightly different, most of them are the same, but the essence of what those characters are really do shine through. And you can tell that no one person is this pure ideal of everything that you think of. It's also their circumstance. And when you meld the two, you get some pretty interesting details.
Amen to that. So the story opens in 1953. The Soviets reveal Superman to the world. Instead of fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, he's basically towing the Communist Party line and acts in furtherance of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet superpower. So CIA agent James Olsen asks Lex Luthor to help create a metahuman for the United States to counteract Superman. And they end up creating basically this world's version of Bizarro. I'm not really going to get into that. So Pyotr Roslov, Pete Ross, is head of the KGB, and he's the illegitimate son of Joseph Stalin. And so he resents Superman for disrupting his plans to end up taking over the country. And after Stalin's death, Superman initially refuses, but then ultimately decides to take leadership of the Communist Party.
Wait. I got to jump in on this one. So do you remember how Stalin was killed?
Cyanide poisoning.
Yeah. You want to talk about timely? Jeez. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's Russia. Anytime you're dealing with government and suppression of dissidents, I don't care what decade the story takes place in, it's timely. Because Russia gonna Russia. Here's the new boss, same as the old boss. So Superman takes control of the Communist Party and by extension, the USSR. And by 1978, only the United States and Chile are not part of the Warsaw Pact. All communist nations are prosperous, but Superman is kind of big brotherish, and any dissidents are turned into robots with mind control technology. So Luthor works with Brainiac, the computer alien in super intelligence, to shrink Moscow, but they end up shrinking Stalingrad instead, much like the bottled city of Kandor, if you're familiar with DC lore. And so Superman takes control of Brainiac and reprograms him to help. Then the Batman, who is the orphan son of parents that are killed by Roslov, leads a Soviet resistance against Superman and manages to use Wonder Woman to lure Superman into a trap using red light lamps that turn him mortal. Unfortunately, Wonder Woman breaks free of the restraints and destroys the device, which leads Batman to kill himself as a martyr for the cause.
Yeah, just to once again jump in a little bit, Wonder Woman does have somewhat of a role in this story. Once again, on the communist side, has kind of an affection for Superman. But after all of this stuff happens, things kind of turn sour for her for really, really obvious reasons.
Right. And the one thing I'll say about this is it's repeatedly stated throughout the story that Superman can hear everything. He can react instantaneously. I mean, at one point he saves cosmonauts on the space station because he was able to see the flash of something like the oxygen setting a flame in the space station. Yet Batman walks into the museum, announces he's planted bombs, says, "You have 4 minutes to escape." And Superman doesn't do anything. Like, he doesn't just immediately show up and go, "And I've neutralized the bombs and you're no longer a threat." Like, the bombs go off, everything explodes. We're supposed to believe that Superman is this, like, super OP, even for Superman, that he's this omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient character within the USSR, within the Soviet Union. And yet Batman is like literally operating in his backyard and manages to pull everything off.
So I'm going to take the ultimate cop-out, and I don't have... And mind you, anything that I've said so far is from reading this years ago. I have not actually read this again for preparation of this, so I apologize if I get any details wrong. I'm not apologizing for your point because it's not in the book. But I will say that in circumstances like that, similar to how Captain Marvel is treated during the whole MCU situation, Superman could be doing a lot of things. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. And even with the idea that he's omnipresent, I'll just say, the idea that there could be enough distractions going on that may very well be planned, considering who Batman is now at this point teaming up with, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Again, it was just one of those things. I don't want to say it was a story-breaking plot hole, but they really talk about Superman and his abilities in this book quite a bit. And this being Mark Millar, I thought the story was fantastic, but some of the exposition was like beating you over the head with things and like, hey, we're going to reference this. And, oh, Nixon was assassinated in 1963 and da-da-da-da-da. And it was just the way that they felt, the way that they felt they had to reference all of these things to show you just how different this world is from the standard comic history / real world. I was like, okay, this is just, it's a little much. But
okay, so I'm wait. Yeah, I know it's nitpicking, but I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and expound on that just a little bit. And I'm going to say that this is both a credit to you and a detriment to us, because a lot of the things that you're saying that are details that are kind of filler for the background of what this is for such a honestly speaking, relatively short series. At the same time, not everybody has that awareness or even puts that into consideration for what's going on for a story like this. So I think it was necessary. I thought what you were going through with that is you're willing to put that much detail into those parts of your world building, but then something as simple as that type of plot point gets short shrift. That would be my complaint. But like I said, even I can come up with reasons why that would happen anyway. So yeah, it didn't take too much away from me.
That's fair. Like I said, I was just, as I was reading this, thinking that some of the exposition, like I said, was just a little heavy handed, like Superman and Wonder Woman flying and talking, oh, well, what would have happened if Nixon hadn't been assassinated in 1963? And I'm like, oh, okay. So this is how we're going to play it. Okay. But in any case, Luthor then uses the ship that landed in Roswell in 1947 and the green ring that was found on the hand of the alien inside said spaceship as a weapon to create an army of Green Lanterns. So now it's 2001. Lex Luthor is president and James Olsen is vice president. And Luthor has turned the United States into a profitable nation once again because he's Lex Luthor and he's a genius. And so throughout the story, it's a combination of show, don't tell, but also tell to really talk about how Lex is a verifiable genius. And he's like, oh, I was reading 13 books this morning and he's playing like 70 chess games at the same time and blah, 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 blah. And he's like, oh, I could end hunger and balance the budget anytime I want if you just listen to me. So he breaks into the Winter Palace, which is the Fortress of Solitude, which I thought was a nice little nod to the actual legitimate Russian history, where the Winter Palace was basically where I believe that the Tsar lived. They sort of merged the two. And so he breaks into the Winter Palace and he's basically egging, in a sense, Superman to attack, and Brainiac rushes Luthor away to turn him into a mind-controlled robot because he tells Superman he would have talked you into suicide within 14 minutes because that's how smart he is. So Superman assaults the East Coast. He defeats both the Green Lantern Corps and the Amazonian forces because by this point, Wonder Woman says, you've gone too far with this approach and we need to stand up to you. So Superman reaches the White House and he sees a letter from Luthor in the pocket of Lois Lane Luthor, because she's been married to Lex for over 20 years at this point, in a very loveless, sterile marriage. And we're going to get into that momentarily. And the letter just reads, why don't you just put the whole world in a bottle? And this breaks Superman down and he realizes, oh my God, what have I done? I have stripped the world of its free will. And, I had the best of intentions, but as we all know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so Superman says, okay, I'm sorry for everything. We're going to call off the assault. At which point Brainiac says, no, this is part of my plan. I'm going to take over the Earth. And you were stupid enough to go along with everything I was suggesting to you. Lex, who was, as I said, scheduled for the mind control surgery, actually shuts down Brainiac from within, but not before Brainiac could start the infamous, you have 60 seconds because I've started the self-destruct countdown. So Superman flies the ship into space and it explodes, seemingly killing Superman, although we end up seeing him as Clark Kent at the funeral for Superman. Under Lex Luthor, the world enters a period of peace and prosperity because all the nations of the world are united and everybody has like super long lifespans and technology explodes and everybody eats and everybody gets all their earthly desires. And so we see the distant future in which the Earth is now dealing with a red dwarf sun that is about to explode, and a distant descendant of Lex known as Jor-El sends his son Kal into the past to help save the planet from certain destruction. So we've got a nice little destination time loop.
Yep.
And
the idea that the entire L family and descendancy is actually Luthor's.
that was such a
I
brilliant move.
I saw where it was going as I'm reading it. I'm like, oh no, you really wouldn't pull the trigger on this. Like, yep, sure did.
Yep, they're talking about Alexander Luthor Jr. and this Luthor and this dash Luthor and this dash Luthor and this dash L, and then eventually you get into the future and it's like I don't know how many thousands of years in the future.
Yep.
And I'm like, son of a bitch. That's actually kind of brilliant.
Yep.
Mark Millar, for all of the heavy-handedness and some of the stories that he's written, when he's on, it's beautiful. And this, like I said, is why this is my favorite Elseworld story, because of just the brilliant merging of all of this stuff. So as I said, we're going to do things a little differently. We're not going to focus strictly on Superman. We're going to look at a number of the characters within this story and do like a mild compare contrast, but mostly look at them within the context of this universe. And starting obviously with Superman, it's a very warped use of might makes right. But we see it again, even in this story, his heart is in the right place, as it always is because he's Superman. But we really see a perversion of that idea, and how much of that is due to growing up under communism versus how much of that is the influence of Brainiac and trying to address all of the externalities that he's coping with. We don't really know. I'd love to get Mark Millar on here to talk about it. But first things first, Doc, I'll let you sort of expound a little bit on that.
Sure. I'm actually going to start backwards here. So I'm going to start with near the end. The idea that what quote unquote broke him and what Brainiac may have been talking about in terms of Luthor being able to talk him into suicide was the idea that he definitely shows the conscious idea that every person, every living being has a sense of value and a sense of worth. Unfortunately, I think that's where things start to go wrong, because you don't want to kill everybody, but you also don't want defiance. And therefore, if you can find a way to keep someone alive, but not have them disagree with you, then that creates a sense of peace. So that's where you get the whole drone, robot, whatever you want to call it thing. And it's also used in the video game series Injustice Gods Among Us. So that's one part of it. You also have the idea of when you seem to have a penchant to want to, quote unquote, do the right thing, whatever that is. For some people, that comes from what your parents say the right thing is, or what the government says the right thing is, or whoever is popular in media says the right thing is. In the case of someone coming up in a communist country, you can kind of meld all those things into one and just say yes, meaning the largest father figure, the person in charge of the media, the person that has control, all of it is going to end up being the same thing. And especially if the parents of said person are indoctrinated the same way, then yeah, it's one-stop shopping. So now you don't really need to delve that much deeper into it, because now you're just going to have that as your layout for the way the world works. So that's ironically pretty simple. And he also has, though, I'll say, in comparison with the Superman that we know from Kansas, he also has this idea that he doesn't necessarily want to go too far with his power unless it's absolutely necessary. Superman didn't automatically just say, well, yep, I got to be in charge of everything. I got to be in charge of the Communist Party. I got to run everything. It was more like, wow, you're a strong dude. You need to do this. It's like, I don't know. And it's like, well, it's for the greater good. All right, I'm up. So maybe compared to that other Superman, he does it way more willingly, but only because he's been indoctrinated with the idea of, if that's what the nation is saying needs to happen, then that is absolutely the thing that I must do. And I'll do it at all costs as long as I see that it continues to provide a positive in the world. And as has been pointed out in the story, there is a lot of positive in the world. He's basically creating a utopia. It's just a utopia with his vision alone. And it's a utopia where you won't have to die as long as you go along with everything. And therefore, why would anybody ever have a complaint? It ignores the idea of individual agency, and that's the huge difference.
Yeah, he does say at one point in response to Brainiac basically saying, why don't you just invade them and end this? That he says something along the lines of, I'm winning the argument and I won't win the argument if I just invade. Like, he is so convinced in his heart that what he's doing is the right thing that he doesn't want to jeopardize that. He's taking, in his mind, the high road, even though, as you said, he's completely disregarding free will and individual agency to do anything, which is one of the things that Batman mentions to him before he,
we'll get
self-destructs. But again, as you said, we'll get to that. So the next one, I want to jump to Pyotr Roslov. Pete Ross is a character that admittedly I don't know a whole lot about.
Because there's not much to say. Ooh, sorry, a little too biting, but truth.
Okay, fair. I mean, honestly, my biggest exposure to Pete Ross was through the Smallville TV show, where he was classmates with Clark. So I can't fully comment on what really distinguishes this version of Pete from the one that we usually know and care about. But it's very obvious that this Pyotr Roslov will never get Stalin's approval as an illegitimate son. And that is what clearly drives him to do everything. He is convinced that if he just does what his father needs, then he will earn his father's respect, his father's love, and perhaps most importantly, control of the KGB and the country. And when Superman shows up, that throws a whole giant Kryptonian monkey wrench into his plans, and he doesn't know how to counter that.
Yeah. On one hand, I think Pyotr Roslov is incredibly petty. On the other hand, I think he has an incredibly legitimate gripe. So let me parse this out a bit. There is nothing that is owed to anyone except for their existence and the things that we consider to be the most valuable for them to survive. That is a very harsh thing to say, but the whole point of it is, if you start with that idea, that basic construct, it allows you to survive just about any situation, because you're not looking for anyone to automatically do things that may not be in their best interest. So Pyotr, in a different world, may have had a situation where he would have a loving, knowing father that wanted the best for him and did everything that would be expected of a person that has the power and authority, in theory, in a benevolent way, if we're really going to go ahead and go into this dream world. And he ends up doing what his heart desires, and the world is better for it. And Pyotr has all the enjoyments and all the other things that we would want someone to have. Beautiful. Didn't happen. That doesn't necessarily mean that things have to be 100% against you. The way that he approached things wasn't just that things were unfair, it was that things were directly antagonizing him. And there is a difference. And there may be someone out here that needs to hear this. In the world, there are many things happening. There are many bad things that are happening. That does not automatically mean that there are many bad things intentionally happening to you. If you view the world that way, it's going to create a lot of bitterness. It's going to automatically create enemies that may not have had to exist. So the fact that Pyotr is able to accomplish what he does shows that despite that mindset, he really does have a lot of positive attributes. You don't end up in that nation. You don't end up in that government, in that society, and end up in a position of power, as much as we like to downplay it, purely because of nepotism. You must have had something that was considered of value, something that was considered worthy. And he makes it up the ranks anyway. So that says a lot. That does say something incredibly powerful about him. But this goes beyond having a chip on your shoulder. He has the entire lumberyard, and he just will not let these things go. He won't look at any other angle besides what he sees as wrong. And because of that, I think it's shown that it's to his detriment. I have no issue with, for example, the idea that he's going to end up teaming up with other people that are going to be beneficial to him. But the irony of it is, and this is purely conjecture on my part, I don't have evidence for this. I think sometimes the way that he's written, if he had actually had a sit down with someone like Superman in a way that wasn't threatening, I think they could have worked something out. Maybe that's just me being like this super idealist that I can do in a comic book instead of being the cynic that I usually am. But I really do see that. I think that the notion that, okay, he wanted eventually to be the man in charge. I'm not going to say there's anything automatically wrong with that. But the idea that he's pushing so hard with this, I never got what I deserved, and because of that, everyone else has to, has to bow down. That. I mean, not only does it get old, it really gets destroyed by someone who really does have that type of power, and it didn't necessarily have to happen that way. I'm not saying he had to be a suck up. I'm just saying that, what's that old saying? You catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. I mean, don't throw freaking vinegar at everybody's face right up front and then wonder why people still get pissed at you.
But what if I have a lot of vinegar and I feel like people like it? And then I see everybody walking around with salty potato chips and they're like, these are good, but they could be better. And I have so much vinegar and I just throw it at them and I go, here, I'm making your chips better. Why don't you love me?
That is one of the most unique analogy / what the fuck moments I can recall. Wow. Kudos to you, sir.
I'm glad I could bring some levity and enjoyment. Also, now I really want salt and vinegar potato chips. So, Wonder Woman, Diana. It's obvious from the start that she has a crush on Superman, and he harbors some kind of feelings towards her because he believes that she is one of the only, if not the only person who can understand what he's going through with his power set. But their relationship really sours because he has a very sterile view of the world. And I would say he approaches almost Dr. Manhattan-esque detachment from humanity for at least the middle third of the book. He's really operating on this sense of, oh, I'm so far above these people. Why aren't they grateful for what I'm doing? And Diana, in turn, becomes almost the Lori in this relationship. And it's a very interesting place to see somebody like Diana, because that's not typically her role in a lot of these stories. And especially once she breaks free of the lasso, which we also see has a major impact on her physically and what it does to her. And in terms of I believe it grays her hair. And she's now all of a sudden looking much older and a little more frail. And I believe it does permanently sap a lot of her power. And it also creates a major rift in her relationship with Superman. And from then on, it's almost cordial, but not affectionate.
Yeah, that entire section specifically, and forgive me for my tangent coming up. You had one that was a non sequitur. I have one that might be a little too deep, and I apologize, but we've never really discussed anything like this way. So we know that relationships change over time. And this one was never quite lovey-dovey anyway. I mean, nowhere near what we're going to talk about after this, but you could tell that Lois wanted part of that puppy love that I know I've mentioned so many times. Just that idea of people being close, enjoying the moment.
Wait, Lois or Diana?
Not Lois. I apologize. Diana.
Yeah, you're talking.
I apologize.
No. I was just like you're. You must be thinking as we all are. Typically thinking of Superman and Lois.
Right. I apologize. Of Diana, of Wonder Woman. I'm going to stick with Wonder Woman. It makes it easier. Of Wonder Woman, just wanting at least some of that. Doesn't have to be all the time, but just having those moments. And he never gives that. But then on top of that, I remember reading this story. It might have been even an old-fashioned email chain of two people. They're married. The relationship is not what it once was. And at one point, the husband says to his wife, I have to be honest with you. I don't love you the same way that I have before. And her response was, okay, I get it. Is there another woman involved? And I don't even remember if he says yes or no, but her point was fine. But I do ask you of this one thing. You don't have to spend any time with me during the day. You don't have to go out with me. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to, obviously we still have to take care of the kids. But the one thing I want from you every morning, just like when we got married, I want you to carry me over the threshold into our bedroom. That's it. When we wake up, it's going to be very artificial and awkward, I know, but I want you to do that. And he looks at her very weird and he says, all right. And he does it every morning for the next several months. And he notices that she's losing weight. And he notices that her hair is thinning and eventually starts falling out. And he notices groaning when she gets lifted up because she's in pain. And she's going through so many things that she never told him because she noticed that he was distant. And when he finally asks what's going on and she announces her cancer diagnosis, he said, I realized that it took me way too long to realize how important you are and everything that you're going through. And I'm sorry that I was only spending this time carrying you over the threshold. But from that point forward, I'll make sure I'm always by your side. And the reason why I bring up a story like that is so many times when it comes to relationships, we look at what everyone brings to the table as a positive. And if they bring a negative, we do our best to downplay it, or we look at it as a quirk or something that in theory needs to be improved on at best and ignored at worst. But what about the idea that you simply incorporate it into your daily life and recognize it for what it is and actually allow your relationship to grow from it? Obviously, Wonder Woman and Superman did not do that. And we see the exact opposite. Every change that happens, every major event that goes along just drives them further apart. And that's the type of thing that if you see that happening in your own life, I think it's an opportunity to have a conversation with that person you consider to be important to you so that, not to sound super heroic about it, but there may be something worth saving there. And it may be as simple as saying, I didn't realize this change was happening. Superman is oblivious to it. It's not necessarily that he wants to hurt Wonder Woman. It may just be that they never had the type of communication that was necessary to establish them on the same footing. And I'm sorry that it didn't happen. But that doesn't mean at any point that it couldn't have changed. I really think that's true. I really think that even with the way she physically changed, which we'll all admit, attraction is important, but it's not everything. And I know a lot of people, I've had these types of conversations. As John Legend would say, all your perfect imperfections. If you really lean into it, if you really embrace it, you can end up with something way stronger than what you started with. And it's a shame that two super powered beings never really gave themselves the opportunity to do that.
Well, I definitely remember that story from chain emails or Reddit that happened or something along those lines. I've definitely heard that story before. But the way
I'm sure there's a million variations of it, but that's yeah.
But the way that you use that analogy to then tie it to Superman and Wonder Woman, I thought was very, very interesting. And I appreciate that kind of insight. And also just in general, we'll use this as an opportunity to say, hey, make sure if you have a partner that you show them that you care about them and that you don't take them for granted. Words of advice from two happily married men. But that advice goes regardless of gender or sexual preference. So Batman, in this version, we see his parents die by the hands of Pyotr Roslov. I'm trying to remember now. I think it was because they were dissidents or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly what it was that made Peter shoot them. But this version goes farther than his mainstream counterpart in support of his ideals. The regular Bruce Wayne, I don't think would ever opt for suicide. He might, but I really don't see that as a viable option. And we'll, I'm sure, have that discussion at some point in March with our multi-week Batman episodes. Maybe that's something we can ask Dr. Langley. But this one, he goes so far as to swallow a bomb that he knows Superman can see with his X-ray vision, because he says, I'm not going to get captured. I'm not going to get turned into one of your automatons. He is so committed to the idea of free will. And I think this really almost is a contrast, not just from the mainstream Batman, but from something like Miller's Dark Knight, where that version of Bruce is very heavy-handed and very much the man and the authority and trying to tamp down on any sort of rebellion or dissidence. This version of Bruce is the rebellion, and he is the symbol of that resistance. It's just really interesting from that perspective to, again, compare and contrast against the various versions of Bruce that we see. So I just wanted to get your take on why this Batman goes to a place that we don't normally see Bruce go.
Once again, all of this is going to be speculation on my part. I don't have definitive 100% answers to this. So no, I won't ever get into shouting matches over this topic. But I will say this comes to, at least the way it's presented in comics, the idea of what has more value, the person or the movement. And for the most part, comic books are oriented towards saying the answer is the person. Meanwhile, in most media, whatever media that is, you'll get it all over the spectrum. Some will make it much more, it's the system or it's the movement, it's the idea, and that's pervasive over any one individual character. But comics tend to push it the opposite way. So then the question is, what is the role of that character in the movement? For the most part, when we think of Batman, we think of a relatively singular, isolative entity that is able to make massive amounts of impact because of lurking in the shadows, being relatively anonymous, but having a substantial backing, be it finance or whatever intelligence or abilities that he has solely developed over a prolonged period of time and is just about tireless in his motivation to get things done. I don't see that much different in this Bruce, but I will say that in this case, there is a certain level of acceptance in this Bruce that this may not work. And it doesn't say it in the comic, but there is a certain sense of potential failure that it almost feels inevitable. And if that's the truth, then this Bruce comes to the conclusion that I really don't have any other options. I've run out of choices. And if I don't have other choices, I will make the one final choice for myself. And that's actually very common in severe depression. The idea that there is nothing else that can be done. And therefore, if you have to do something, if you have the choice between doing something and not doing something, well, you're quote unquote going to feel better by doing something. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it the best choice, but that makes it a relatable choice. And that's the thing that sometimes happens where, for example, people who have never experienced either depression or the thought of just, in this case, what we're really talking about is martyrdom. Martyrdom is different in that it's not just that you want to end suffering, which is one of the most common points for suicide, but the idea that my death actually has added value compared to my life. That is something that not a lot of people, at least as far as we know, experience. And once again, I'm saying, how on earth would I ever even have the ability to know that because of the people that have died? And let's be honest, how many people that are considered martyrs were willing martyrs? They may have known that their lives were in danger, and they may have come to terms with the idea that they may die at any moment. That doesn't mean that they were willingly going to do it. So that's a couple of leaps that this character made that many humans don't ever get to. And once again, I'm doing my best to make sure I am not glorifying this in the sense of saying that that is the best way to go about things or anything of the sort. And I will go ahead and I will give my bias on this, by the way. I do think that life is worth it. And I do think that there is always a value to a person continuing to live as long as they acknowledge that there is something that they still want to have in their lives. But I'm also a person that is part of an ethics board. And I also have discussions about palliative care, about hospice, about the idea that when a person no longer has the quality of life that they think they should, that they should be allowed to have certain things that allow for comfort in the process of dying. Well, unfortunately, we're not talking about that part because Bruce is definitely shown as still being very active, still being able to kick ass. So I don't think we were going down that line. But having said that, his point of, well, I'm going to be given the choice of being a robot with no control, with no free will, with having, I'm going there, with locked in syndrome in a coma for the rest of my life, with no agency whatsoever. And I have the option where I can do things on my terms with the people around me that I would want. And the person that is important in making this decision, knowing where I stand and that I was of sound mind and body to make that choice. Ooh, that's a little heady. That's a little heady. And the idea that he does this all under a highly authoritarian regime on top of that. Let's get it clear. He ain't no Mahatma Gandhi. That's for darn sure. And suicide bombers are, in my opinion, incredibly despicable. So I don't want to glorify it that way either. But that's the type of stuff that if you give it enough thought, you can be talked into anything. And honestly, this character, when you really look at all of the ways this could have gone, him to basically say, I'm going out my way, my terms, with hopefully the world slightly better than the way I'm leaving it, it's relatable. That's all I'm getting at. I am not trying to advocate or glorify any of the things that I'm saying. I'm pointing out that these are all the things that exist in the world, in our world, not just comics. And honestly, for most of us, we like to live in our bubbles of however we view those topics, and we don't want to ever consider the other side. And yet, I think that may be the only way we start to bridge that gap with why some people take these paths. If we don't talk about it, it's going to permanently remain a black box that we're going to just be shouting to the heavens about and wonder why we're not making progress.
Very insightful. I wish I could condense so much of that into like a 60-second sound clip or the quote. I'm gonna use something from that and post it on Instagram. It's gonna happen. I haven't quite figured out exactly what part of it, but some of that is going to end up on Instagram. So I want to get now to the first couple of this book, and I want to start with Lois Lane. Why does she stay with Luthor in a loveless marriage? Because I want to end on Lex, because I think he is, outside of Superman, he's obviously, I think, the most compelling and fascinating character, Luthor being Luthor. So much of this is just coming down to Luthor just being the pure distillation of that. But we see from the jump, we see from the beginning of the story that Lois is married to Luthor. I never understood why. It was just because we needed to have Lois Lane in the story somewhere, and they were like, screw it. We'll just have her married to Lex. It would have made more sense for me for her to be married to Olsen, to Jimmy Olsen, than to Lex Luthor. She's married to Lex for over 20 years in a sterile marriage. It's indicated that he doesn't do anything with her except on their anniversary. And she's like, this is the one night of the year that we are supposed to focus and pay attention on each other. But from the beginning of the marriage, it's clear that he doesn't care for even the institution. So why is she married to him, and why did he agree to marry her? I don't get it.
So what I'm about to say, I hope doesn't sound like a hot take, and it's not meant to, but even just going back to almost 20 years ago, it's because the idea of someone in that position, be it a president or whatever, they're going to have a first lady. They're going to have someone on their shoulder. That's pretty much it. I wish I could go deeper than that, but I think that's a lot to do with it. This is not meant to be a slight to Lois whatsoever. It's obvious that at some point these two had this conversation, and the book does allude to it, as you said. So when two people decide that they're going to make a contract, I think this comes down to how people view those types of contracts. I'm not even talking about from the legal aspect, just the idea of till death do us part. Is that the most important thing? And at least for Lois, yes, it is. She's willing to do that. She may regret that every single day, but clearly the regret is not enough to say that she's willing to go through the dissolution. And not only that, is there a level of fear in the imbalance in the relationship? So what happens? Let's go down this rabbit hole. Let's say she says, you know what? Screw off, Lex. You're clearly not interested in me whatsoever. You have the world in your hands with the exception of this one overpowered freak. I don't need to be involved in this. I'm out of here. Well, what does her life look like after that? Can he slander her? Yes. Can he, even though, quote unquote, she'd get half, can he find so many loopholes and ways to make her life miserable that she wishes she had never gotten divorced in the first place? I think so. There are just so many things that could be pitfalls to if she walks away at that point, and it could just purely be out of spite. That's a huge risk. So I'm not saying that Luthor is abusing her, but I'm saying that by position alone, there's the opportunity for abuse. And maybe she recognizes that. Or, once again, not meant to be an insult, but just simply an observation, maybe there is enough there in terms of the amenities. Being the first lady, having the fame, having people that are at your beck and call pretty much for the rest of your life. There is some value to that. Is it enough that you're willing to be with a person that maybe you don't see any other enjoyment with? I don't know, but I mean, I wouldn't think so, but that's not my choice to make. So those are the two big things. The idea of, and I know this goes back to the difference between, well, actually, no, it's all three. It's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. And just briefly to go over what those things are. Punishment, we all understand, is the idea that you take an action and you get a negative response based on that action. Therefore, you're not going to do that action again. Negative reinforcement is the avoidance of a negative stimuli. I'm going to stick with this guy because if I don't, then I know that there may be something coming my way. I'm avoiding that negativity. And then, of course, the positive reinforcement or reward. I'm with the president. That is really awesome. And it allows me to get access to things I never would have in my life. So there you go. I'm not saying all of those are right or wrong. I'm just saying that's just the way it is.
I understand that, but that argument only makes sense if he's been the president for an extended period of time. He's not the president until a long time into the story.
All right. So to clarify what I'm saying, I'm using that simply as the talking point to make it quick, because I know we've gone through so many characters. But he has always been in a situation where it's clear he's going to be on the rise in something. I don't care if it's his corporation. I don't care if it's in the scientific world. I don't care if it's in, if whatever it is, he's going to be the man. She's with the man. So that's really what I'm getting at.
So now let's talk about the man. And I would give a woo here were my son not sleeping in the next room.
Woo!
Thank you. This kiss-stealing, wheel-and-dealing son of a gun is...
Actually, if he were, he'd still have Wonder Woman.
So Lex is a really fascinating character in this book because he functions as a hero, but with the motivations of a villain. Everything he does is for the betterment of the planet. But the only reason he's doing anything, the only reason his entire character is motivated for 50 years is to destroy Superman. That's all he cares about. Every positive thing that he does along the way is a byproduct of that singular goal. And to have a villain who's not really a villain, to me is just, it's wonderful writing because, again, at no point during any of this, anything that he does in the story, do you look at his actions and go, no, Lex wouldn't do that. Lex absolutely would do every single thing in this book that he's doing. I don't care what version of Lex, outside of maybe like Lex Luthor of Earth 2 or Earth 3, whichever one it is. I think it's Earth 3. Every villainous version of Lex would do the exact same thing under these conditions. But he's the hero of the story because of it. That's what makes this such a damn good story.
And I'm going to go ahead and take a twist on this. So, is anybody familiar, and Anthony, I'll include this as a question to you. Anybody familiar with the books and later made into a TV show, Dexter?
I'm familiar with it enough.
Okay, so the idea is a person who grew up knowing basically that he was a serial killer, and thankfully with the input of, he calls him Saint Harry, but his adoptive father, who's a cop, he's able to channel it in a way that betters the world, but it still leads to him killing people. So that's the most extreme. Like, if you want to get super extreme about those types of scenarios, that's the most extreme that I'm aware of. But this book with Lex takes it a very similar way. The idea that you can create a construct around yourself that even in the most dire of circumstances, your negative motivations end up creating good. So he's not just wanting to be a leader. We've talked about that so many times. It's not a matter of being a leader. He wants to be an overlord. He has no problem with being in that position. And he does everything that way, as you said. And the fact that the world has been so warped, so maladjusted, or at least in a way that it allowed for this one little avenue, like 1 in a billion chance that this would be the path that would let this character be considered a great hero consistently. That's the thing that's different about this book compared to other books. We've had plenty of times where people have done the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore they end up, doing some sort of good. Or I'm coerced because merely need to survive. Then you're thinking Suicide Squad. There's so many variations, but the idea that throughout his lifetime as an adult, because of the circumstances of an oppressive regime that has taken over the world, and your circumstances are considered downtrodden in terms of your people, the United States at the time is going through a really rough patch. So they're willing to go through someone that's going to take charge like that and lead them into prosperity. Okay, so you got that side. And then in addition to that, now you're fighting you're the underdog, which Luthor, for the most part, is not wired that way, but is certainly going to go ahead and take advantage of that. In addition to the idea that you have so many people that have skin in the game and the alien technology thing that also wants to be involved. And all of them have a way of wanting to just get their own power. And Luthor basically realizing, I can use every single person on this chessboard and win pretty much no matter what. That's marvelous. And I find it fascinating because to relate it to more of our real life, as a psychiatrist, I deal with people that have antisocial personality disorder, that have narcissism, that have, in theory, done so many sociopathic and psychopathic things in terms of the damage that they've done in the world and all of that. And yet, there are plenty of people, and this is going to be scary for some to hear, there are plenty of people that have never once laid their hand on someone in anger. They have never been to jail, and yet they still carry those traits. What does that say? What does that mean? That means that those people have actually found a construct that works for them that allows them to still be a part of society without being considered a detriment. And that's a wonderful thing. There is nothing wrong with the idea that you recognize you have certain traits that if you didn't recognize them, if you weren't aware of them, they could get out of hand. Or, heaven forbid, there was a situation where they got out of hand, you didn't get caught, and you realized, oh my God, I need some help. I can't live like this, even if it's not necessarily to say I want people to be better for it, but just simply I'm avoiding the consequence. Once again, coming down to those basics. Either way, that is good. That's fantastic. If you ended up becoming a great influencer on Instagram because you wanted to make sure that you spent enough time and energy on your looks because you hit the gym all the time and you think that that is the number one way to live life, and it's better that you do that as opposed to spamming someone on Twitter about how horrible they are as a human being because you'd rather say something negative to someone and bring them down rather than raising yourself up, you know what? I'm all for it. So I'm just giving real world examples of how just because there may be something that's considered a negative, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be negative to everyone else or even to yourself. You can always find an angle. You can always find a way to make things better for yourself and for others if you're willing to put in the effort for it.
I like that, especially that ending. And it's very clear that you got passionate about that. I love when you get passionate about this stuff. So we're going to take a quick break. And we get back, we will get into some potential treatment options. Stay tuned.
Have you ever wondered what scotch will make your palate feel like it's just gone on a majestic journey through the Highlands? If LeBron will ever win another ring? Or if the Leafs will ever win another Stanley Cup?
Mike, if they tune in to Scotch N Sports, they're going to find all that out and more. They're going to find out what's souring our scotch, what our next scotch on the shelf is, and our On the Rocks segment, where we debate two topics. You just met Mike. I'm Gertie. We got suds coming up, and we may be drinking scotch, but our biased opinions don't change no matter how much we've had, and we have quite a bit. We'll even answer viewer questions, so send them in, and if you don't like the answer, well, we'll just have to have another scotch, and we can still all be friends.
We even talk a little, or a lot, of pop culture. Where else can you find hot takes on WandaVision, NFL analysis, and the fact that the Leafs will in fact win the Stanley Cup this year? Answer, Scotch N Sports.
Do you love movies and psychology?
Do you want to know what it would be like if Batman was in your therapy office?
Listen to our podcast, Popcorn Psychology. 3 therapists dissect blockbuster movies, available everywhere you find podcasts.
This is Phillip Kennedy Johnson, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back, and we're going to talk treatment in universe. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to just focus on Superman and Lex. We'll start with Superman in universe.
All right, so first thing, we're starting in a red room. I can't take any chances whatsoever, which I'm sure he could still whoop me if even with being depowered. But I think the first thing is, it's going to sound like sucking up a little bit, but just acknowledging that everything he's doing is from a genuine place of wanting the world to be better, and just trying to get to some of these really cold emotions that he's pushed to the side. It really just having the difficult conversations that he's never had to have. Like, do you, and it's going to sound weird, but like, do you want a legacy? That may sound weird because it's like, well, he's there. He is his own legacy, but more like, yeah, but do you want other people to be able to benefit from that? Like, to be blunt, do you want kids? Do you want a relationship? Do you want to experience the things that clearly you haven't, or at least not in the way that we have? You seem to be sympathetic to the human condition, but you don't want to experience it. And that's the difference between this Superman and the other Superman that we really have come to know over the decades. And just really explore. And that's the thing. I know I can do that without the idea of having massive repercussions, in the sense that he's willing to, as you said, win the argument. So unfortunately, I know he's just simply going to want to debate with me. And my job is to say, I'm not debating, I'm stating. That's my only job here. I don't care who wins or loses. I want you to have a much better control over what you have never sought, and that is control over how you feel. That's pretty much the approach I would take. And since I'm not a threat, at least not in that way, I don't think he would make me a drone, but you never know. So it really would be a therapy session, or an attempt at a therapy session. And the idea that I would let my guard down like that and know that I could trust him on that. See, that's the other thing. The idea that you don't need another overarching figure, be it the government or anything else, to say that there is a basic trust in humanity. The idea that I'm introducing that, I hope that would lead to some sort of better dialogue, better discourse, that there is a way to view the world with an emotional lens that doesn't show a sign of weakness.
All right. Now, shifting then to Lex in universe, what do you say that fixes his motivation while still, frankly, keeping all of the net positives that he brings to the world? Is that even possible?
Oh boy. I think very similarly to what he did with Superman via Lois, I think I might have to approach it a very similar way. I may just have to give him a letter detailing the things that I think are important, because I think anything that I say, he would actually, and I'm humble enough to say this, I think he would be able to manipulate my words to the point that I would either be so frustrated that I wouldn't want to deal with him, or he would just have me eliminated, whatever. I think I would go with something this basic. Are you able to show yourself as the man that Lois wishes you could be? That's it.
Wow. That is succinct on a level with his, why don't you just put the whole world in a bottle? I love it. I love it. Armor-piercing question. Full stop. All right. So out of universe, is there a world in which we can make a
oh my god
corollary?
I am, for once, I'm willing to admit I don't have people in mind with this. Usually I'm able to come up with stuff, but for both of those guys, this is rough. This is mainly, and I'll tell you why. It's not just rough because it's always tough to come up with analogs for iconic characters. It's rough because you're also invoking a lot of things. You're invoking socioeconomics, politics, just so many factors that influence how you end up treating someone. So I'm gonna parse it out just a little bit, and I apologize. It's gonna be very scattered. I'm sure there's a section of people saying, "So what's new, Doc?" The idea that, for example, you have people that have come from certain political backgrounds that are now trying to adjust to a different world, and all of the emotional aspects that come with that can be big. Huge cultural shifts, I would say, is the overarching theme. So how do you help someone manage those sorts of things? And what I'm about to say may sound dramatic, but it's really not meant to. I've had patients that literally say, I didn't know what freedom was until I came here. So now it's the old classic of, well, now you can do anything. So how do you do anything? And just adapting to a world that no longer has direction. So you're kind of starting from scratch psychologically for a person that's really trying to adapt to a new culture. And the best way I could say it is, this is going to sound way too practical, learn the law. Like, first thing is make sure you don't get yourself in trouble. I'm not being dramatic. Like make sure that you know what's expected of you when you're interacting with the police, and more now than ever. Also, though, what the expectations are for how you're supposed to treat others around you. And you know what? I'll bring it back. Forget even different nations or anything. If you're from a rural culture and you are now living big city life, that's pretty jarring. And now you're having interactions with people that maybe you never had before. And maybe all those things that were considered quirks that you could just do on the farm or out in large land. And now people are pointing out that not everybody recognizes that you're God and you're hearing voices, and this is how you get diagnosed with schizophrenia. These things happen. And so now I'm about to change your world to recognize that, yes, there are other views, and you don't have to agree with them, but you're certainly going to have to come up with a certain level of tolerance, and we're going to have to put a support system in place for you. Or maybe it's the idea that, why on earth are you able to even talk to me like this? And I'll give an exaggeration, but once again, not exactly an exaggeration, you're a woman. How can you be the doctor? These are things that come up more often than you think. And just being the conduit so that a person is able to process a reality that they never knew existed can be its own therapy before you ever get to a DSM diagnosis. And kudos to any of the doctors, therapists, social workers, personal counselors, group counselors, couples therapists, all the people that have been put in these situations. It doesn't happen nearly that often, but when it does, you really start to get a different view of the world, and you realize just how vital we are to making sure that people end up not doing some really strange or dangerous things to themselves, all because of what would be considered sitcom tropes.
I think sitcom tropes are all the rage right now, thanks to WandaVision. But in any case, very unique analysis, and I appreciate you even taking a swing at this, given the different nature of this particular episode and how we're not focused on a particular character and
right,
looking at a collaboration and conglomeration of characters.
Yeah, so the TLDR for the treatment, both in universe and out of universe, for people that really want it.
I don't know. IONO. I don't know. It's a phrase I've used many, many times in my life, even to my kid. Daddy, this, I don't know. The day he says it to me, though, I'm going to go, I shouldn't have said that. But I digress. So, recommended reading for this week is Superman Red Sun. Go pick it up. It's a fantastic book, collected in a trade format. I read it on DC Infinite, still just as good. I read it years ago. I gave myself a refresher on it because I wanted to scope the artwork and a couple of other things. And I didn't want to just go based on my recollection and a Wikipedia summary. And I'm very, very glad that I did. So go and check that out. So upcoming episodes are Mojo, as suggested by Matt. And then we are diving right into March and our Batman month. So we'll have a little more information on exactly which topics. Doc and I still have to hammer all that out, but we'll get into which topics we're going to be hitting first and in which order next week with our Mojo episode. So as always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. Our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Send us your summaries, your voice messages for Batman. capesonthecouch@gmail.com. 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Let us know. Did you watch the TV show? Did you grow up on the movies, the Nolan trilogy, the Michael Keaton versions, the other versions with bat nipples? Did that awaken something in you in your puberty? I don't know. I don't know what age you were when Batman and Robin came out, Batman Forever, those Schumacher films. Listen, I'm not out here to yuck anybody's yum. Send us your thoughts. Let us know what's going on. Let us know what your memories are on Batman, and we'll put them together in an episode in the month of March. And as always, all of our episodes are available on our website, capesonthecouch.com. Check that out. We've got some cool content up there now. As of the release of this episode, Ariel's column will have been posted, or at least 1 week, hopefully 2. Doc, anything you want to add before we head out?
For once, I'm not saying this like sarcastically or anything. I really don't have a pun for this. I just wanted to point out this was one of the most important arcs of comic history that I read, where I realized this can be true storytelling and not just something for fun.
Yep. Amen to that. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.